So we're hollering at them, are you okay? Is everything going to be fine, etc.? And before you know it, the entire boat with them in it capsizes in front of our eyes.
This is the perfect RIA, in case you didn't know. Bringing you all the strategies to help your business grow. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Sit back and listen in while you feel the beat, yeah. Another myth bites the dust.
Hey everybody, before we start this episode, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by The Perfect RIA. How could it not be brought to you by The Perfect RIA? But if you enjoy these episodes, if you think that Micah and I, or at least Micah, have some great advice to give, head over to our website, theperfectria.com, and download one of our free guides towards making your practice better. So it's not just the things you hear on the podcast, it's the things that you implement. And if you're saying, you know what I'd really like to get in a room with Matt and Micah. I'd really like to ask them my own questions. I'd like to be coached by them. Then send an email to lifestyle@theperfectria.com, and one of our great team members will reach out to you and tell you more about the program. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your co-host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me, as usual, the man, the myth, the legend, Micah Schlansky. And of course, we are recording this from the road, which is not unusual, Mike. Actually, if we went back and counted how many episodes were created when one or both of us were on the road, though in this case, we are both in homes, which is unusual. Sometimes you're in your RV or I'm on a boat or who knows where. So welcome back to the big show.
Yeah, aloha. Super happy to be here and kind of talk about some real life experiences on this podcast. Is some things that happen. We think we need to be prepared. We think we need to take care of things in our practices and whatnot. And then life happens and we never get around to it. Then all of a sudden life can kind of catch up with us no matter where we're at. And so this episode is going to be a little bit, it's kind of telling a recent story of some things that happened and then really focus on like, how does that affect us in our own lives and what decisions are we making?
Yeah. And Mike, I think there's two angles that would love listeners to both the story that you're going to tell in this entire episode. There's two angles that we want to take this from. One is there is an illusion that we have that when something bad happens, we'll suddenly know what to do. Now, this could be, for example, Mike, the story you're about to tell. This could be a disaster. This could be an active shooter. This could be all sorts of things. Like, oh, when a bad thing happens, I'll suddenly know what to do. This could even be in your practice. Like, hey, if somebody quits my practice or if the SEC shows up at my door to audit, I'll know what to do then. That's myth number one, right? The other thing that we run into is I don't even want to think about that. So we see advisors that say, like, I don't even want to think about what would happen if my house caught on fire, or if my most valued assistant quit, or if my broker dealer kicked me off my platform, or if I lost my securities license. Like, I don't even want to think that's possible. We call that kind of head in the sand. And so as you hear this story, Mike, that you're going to tell, and as you're thinking about your life and your practice, watch for those two fallacies to arrive. The I'll figure it out if it happens, and the it could just never happen to me. Or if it did, I would be paralyzed. There's just nothing that could be done.
Yeah, that's super important, right? Because that's where we see people get into trouble. And in the story I'm about to tell that just happened this last couple of days, I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened is those two things. It was, well, it's never going to happen to me. It always happens to somebody else. Another one could be someone else is going to help me, right? Someone else is going to jump in and know what to do in this scenario. And sometimes that's the case, but Jarvis, quite frankly, a lot of times that's not the case. And you end up getting advice from people that have never been there, haven't done it, that can end up making things dramatically worse.
Yeah, and that's certainly not a reliable outcome either. Actually, I'm recording this. We're in Cabo, Mexico right now. We were doing side-by-sides with friends, and the side-by-sides had those spot GPS devices, right?
Yeah.
And so the guy had mentioned, he says, listen, we have an operation here in Cabo. We have an operation in Colorado. He says, in Colorado, you push the emergency button. Within 10 minutes, a helicopter will land wherever you're at. He says, in Mexico, you push that button, you might as well just hit it with a hammer when you're done, because that's the extent of the emergency response, right? So there's this illusion like, oh, someone else will take care of this. This again applies to our practice. Hey, if the SEC shows up on my doorstep, you know what I'll do is I'll call my attorney that I don't yet have. But I'm sure I can find one at the time, right? So that's a dangerous spot to be in, Micah.
Yeah. So kind of the interesting thing that happened to us over this last week. So we're in Hawaii right in January. We always go to Hawaii for the month. And our kids have been diving for a little bit, but now it's time to get their C cards, their certification. So they're on their last checkout dives to get their C card. It was on a boat dive. We went out, beautiful day. Now, when we first were exiting the marina, there were some big seas. And so the captain was really good. He's like, all right, we got to time this right. Everybody sit down. And then the surfers were right in the middle of the channel when he's trying to get out. And he's honking the horn. And I'm like, hey, I think you got to treat them like protesters. You hit a couple of them and they're going to go away. They didn't think the same way, but all right. So he's the captain. So he avoided the surfers. We went out there to the crater, ended up having beautiful dives. Ocean was out. Whales were singing under the water, which is just an amazing thing. Saw lots of sharks. and had this great experience. Kids got their certification. We're on our way back. We're kind of wrapping things up. Sure enough, there's big waves and coming to the marina again. It's protected. There's that rock wall around it. Same thing. Captain's like, hey, sit down. I'm going to have to time this. And he waits. He's not looking in front of him, right? Because he's not looking where he's going. He's looking behind him where those waves are coming from, which is the smart thing. And he's looking behind him. He finds a flat spot. He comes into the marina. Everything's good. We get up to the dock. We're just about to offload everything. He's like high five, and it's such a great time. He's giving his little spiel, and we turn, and Jamie goes, Mike, I think they have a problem. And I turn and look. And sure enough, this other fishing vessel that was coming in, about a 20, 25-foot vessel was coming in, got sideways, and one of the waves went over the top of it and filled the boat with water and pushed it up against the rocks into this other cove, which is not a good place to be. And we're like, holy crap, I think this guy's got a problem. And we're watching for a little bit. It looks like he still's got some maneuverability in his engines. You could hear his engines kind of running, kind of doing things. And we're kind of watching for a second, Jarvis. And he kind of gets out of it, which is great. And so then he's kind of almost in the protected marina, and we kind of think that he's okay. And so we're hollering at him because we don't hear his engines running anymore. And we're like, hey, do you need a line? Do you need an assistance? Anything of that nature. And there's no response. And then we start to see the boat start to list. Now, the two people in the boat are standing on the downhill side of it, right? Right,
sure,
the low side, the side they should not be standing on. And we're hollering at him. It's like, do you need assistance? Do you need a line? Get on the upside. Like, what do you need? No response whatsoever. And so the boat captain, I was like, dude, we got to do something. He's like, what do you expect us to do? And his wife was like, Javier, we have to do something. So he's like, great, everybody off, untie the boat. We start going over there while we're watching it. And Jarvis, these people, I think, on the boat are in disbelief because what took maybe 5 minutes for that situation to build, it took less than a few seconds for the boat to capsize. Just all of a sudden, when it was ready, when there was enough water in it, you saw the gunnel kind of drop down and the whole boat was flipped over. And then we're looking for heads, right? Okay, we saw at least two people in the boat. Can we see two people? Where are they at, et cetera? Their gear is scattered here and everywhere. And it was a fishing vessel, so there's fishing lines scattered everywhere. So we ended up getting out in the boat in our vessel and hooked up a tow line in order to tow their boat back. And we got it towed back a little bit, and we're kind of hand lighting this thing in. But then we had to get in the water to get the guys out. And when we got in the water, then there was fishing line everywhere. So you're tied up in fishing line as you're going out, which is great. So we're cutting fishing line, pulling anchors, pulling all of this stuff in. And it was just amazing, a couple of things that were taking place. Number one, when I turned around to look back at the shore when I was in the water, there must have been 100 people goggling, and there was like 3 or 4 people in the water, right? Everyone else was there. Right before I got in the water, some old guy came down and was commenting that we should have reacted sooner. We should have gone out there sooner. We should have helped him more.
Thank you for that sage advice.
And he watched the entire thing. He says, I watched this entire thing. I don't know why you took so long to go do anything. I was like, hey, buddy, now's not the time. Why don't you go take a seat? And, kind of walked him off the deck. And then Jamie had to kind of take him back because all he was doing was a peanut gallery of everything that we should have done sooner with this while he was doing nothing in the situation, but getting away. And so got the fishermen out. They were good. The boat kind of came to the shore. Then the fire department showed up, the first responders or second responders, right? Nothing against the fire department, right? But the thing of terminology here, you are your own first responder, right? You have to be able to do this. Then there was some issue with kind of flipping the boat back over. And I was still in the water kind of cleaning some stuff up. The firefighters were trying to flip the boat, right size it, back over. And my dad's watching him a little bit. And he goes up to the firefighters. He's like, hey, have you guys ever done this before? They're like, no. He's like, all right, well, just a suggestion. Why don't you try A, B, and C in order to right the boat? And the firefighter looks at him and says, have you done this before? My dad's like, yep, about 3 times with, in the water. So this is what you need to do. He's like, huh, okay. And sure enough, they do that and they're able to right the boat, right? And we're able to kind of slowly kind of work it and get it out of the water. But there's like so many stories to debrief of this, especially with our kids, right? Number one is you have to be your own first responder. You have to be ready for those emergencies because normally you can see them coming. But Jarvis, to your point, you're in denial about that whole thing until the split second where it actually becomes an emergency. And you have to step up and be able to do something. Now, it's easy to point to this situation because we just saw the boat capsize. But man, you could pull that right back to your practice, just the things you were saying before about how many things that are you looking at that are reality that we need to be prepared for.
Yeah, the only thing that's interesting, story, Micah, the only thing I would push back on is I think you can see those things coming if you've planned for them in your mind. Having done a lot of boating, I know you have as well.
Great point.
Right. The situation that leads to a capsizing, if you're not aware of the steps that lead up to that, it seems like it happened in a second, right? Like they probably didn't think they were at risk of capsizing until they were upside down in the water. Like it probably had never occurred to them, right? That, wait a second, getting sideways in these waves, you're going to capsize on a heartbeat, right? But so let's translate this to to your practice, right? So where does this happen, right? So this is like, we hear this all the time, Mike. People will say, if my key employee that's been here for so many years, if he or she were to leave, I'd be screwed, right? But they'll never leave. That's the other thing with it, but they'll never leave. My boat will never capsize.
Right.
This person will never leave. No. This is the wrong approach. We need to go in with the assumption, right? This person, let's assume this person's going to leave tomorrow without notice, and they're going to try to take as many of your clients as they can with you. Like, is that an unrealistic scenario? No, that's happened. I know advisors that's happened too. I know one advisor actually, he was on vacation on a fishing trip and his whole team mutinied and they took all of the clients, set up shop across the street. And when he came back, like it was just a locked door, empty office buildings. Mike, I know you have some similar stories to share along that line. So
Yeah.
we have to kind of think through, like, not this scenario could never happen. That's not going to do me any good. If this scenario did happen, how could I potentially see it coming? And whether I see it coming or not, what's my response plan to it?
Jerry, and you got to balance those things out, right? Now, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about how that, a lot of the PTSD comes from people not realizing that evil could actually happen. Then they're encountered with real evil, right, and traumatic things. And they're like, that could never happen to me. And that's a lot of that PTSD that kind of kicks in. And so looking at this and saying, okay, what's the reality of it? But then what's the likelihood of it, right? I want to be aware of
I'm going to
these.
balance it, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to put my sole focus on this is always going to happen, but I need to know about, okay, what are the possibilities that are out there? What am I going to do in this time? When do I need to tap out and get somebody else involved with this as well? But I need to think through those possibilities, but not dwell on them. So you definitely got to balance that.
Yeah, Mike, I think this is closely related as well to this obsession with silver bullets, right? And really, it's almost the exact same thing. Like, hey, I'm thinking if something bad happens, a magical solution will appear. The reverse is also true, though, where like, I think there's some magical solution to these difficult things in my life, right? So examples could be, if I got a new website, if I got a new social media campaign, if I bought Facebook ads, like there's some kind of thing that will shortcut me from having to do the hard work. Same applies to these emergencies, right? Hey, there's some kind of shortcut where I don't need to do the hard work. I have 911 on my phone. Therefore, I don't need to know basic first aid. Hang on a second. It doesn't quite work like that. In fact, it never really works like that.
Yeah, and I'm very active supporting the law enforcement, fire department. I think they do a fantastic job, but they're the first ones that are going to say that, especially my SWAT guys in Alaska, just say, absolutely, you have to be able to take care of yourself because we're 8+ minutes away. Now where I live in the valley, there's like 3 troopers for this entire giant area. Like you're on your own in a situation. So EMS might be able to come if the situation's safe, but what are you going to do? And you got to have that same mentality regardless of where you live with your practice. Is saying, okay, you are on your own with this, unless you have other friends that have been here, you have other allegiances that are out there, but you can't really count on those all the time. It's like your BD. And, the people that come out and say, oh, well, my BD is going to protect me from this. Look, there's pages of people that BDs have U4'd as soon as they start seeing something south. And they're like, they were top of the producers. They were doing great. They were buddies with the owners. And then compliance U4s them because something got a little sideways. They don't have your back. And I'm not bad-mouthing BDs. This is just the fact of the way situations are. What are you doing to make sure your practice is protected?
Yeah, because they actually, in fact, have an emergency plan for this, right? Hey, if there's an advisor who's going outside of the boundaries, outside the guardrails, if we'd like to say, like, we have a plan for that, and it's a U4, like we're going to cut them right off.
Yep.
Actually, Micah, the broker-dealer that Colleen, my longtime relationship manager, worked for before she worked for me, the broker-dealer collapsed. And so everybody woke up one day and the whole broker-dealer was gone. A very, very well-established, very reputable. And again, it's not to single out broker-dealers. It happens in RA space. I have another friend, an RA he was associated with. One day, the FBI showed up and arrested the founder of the RA for billing irregularities. And then that's a discussion we can have another day. But you've got to, and I agree with you, Micah, we got to watch the spectrum, right? I can't spend all my time worrying about is the sky falling, but I can't also be a Pollyanna about it and assume, hey, these things could never happen.
So like, here's one example that we use every year is we have a backup custodian plan that says if Schwab kicks us off the platform or they go under or anything else. And again, we cleared Schwab. Clearly, I have faith and confidence in them. Others wouldn't have my money there or our clients' money there. But we have a backup custodian kind of ready to go. And we kind of review the systems at least once a year. We go through all of this stuff. We evaluate if Schwab's still a good platform for us. Do we need to go somewhere else? And if we had to go somewhere else in 30 days, where would we go and how would we do it? And so, Jarvis, if God forbid, if this ever happens, and I really pray it never does, if we get hit in the head with that kind of 2x4 that Schwab gives us a 30-day letter, it's okay. We have a plan, right? Now, it sucks, just to be clear. It's going to be a lot of work, but we have a plan on exactly how we're going to execute and we're going to pull this off. So these are really important things. If you lose your top 5 clients, what's that going to do to your revenue, by the way? Because I've seen a lot of advisors' books, that 80-20 rule, you start getting to the top of it. It's like a 90-10 rule. So you start losing the top 5 of your clients with death, disability, anything else. What happens to your practice? Another symptoms I see of this, Jarvis, sorry on a little rant, but is a lack of prospecting. Is they're like, oh, I'm good, I'm comfortable. I was talking to an advisor the other day, actually, and he's like, he was really good, he had good income, is comfortable, but he wants to grow it. We start looking at his book. His average age of his clients is 79. The average age of his clients is 79. I was like, dude, your clients are going to die on you,
Yeah.
just because that's what happens with life. And that money's going to go. And he only brought in like 2 clients this last year. And I was like, what's your prospecting plan? He's like, well, I really haven't done prospecting in 10 years. I was like, well, you got to start dusting those muscles off. And I'd start using them right now. And what's your prospecting? How are you going to get into it, right? That's not an unrealistic scenario in that advisor's book. And we all have areas of that in our practice that we need to be aware of. What are those weaknesses and what is the plan if something happens?
Yeah, and these plans, let's kind of dive into the weeds a little bit here. These plans don't have to be super insane. So the best way to do this, and again, you need to be blocking out time on your calendar every single week outside of Surge to be working on your business. This is not playing office. This isn't spending a day cruising the internet. This is spending a day working on your business. And specific to this topic, one of the ways you could do that is start a one-pager. What will we do if our custodian or our RA or broker kicks us off their platform? One-page thing. We have one, Micah, especially because you and I both travel. We travel off the grid extensively. Great. I'm off the grid. What happens in these scenarios? What happens if the day I go off the grid, the SEC arrives at the office? What happens? And then we have a one-pager, and it has cell phone numbers on there, and it has what to do and what not to do. It's a step-by-step guide, right? So that way the team has that, and we review that before I'm going off the grid. Hey, listen, I'm going off the grid. Here's what to do if bad things happen. Like, here's kind of the order of operations.
I was going to say, I want to pull that thread a little
Yeah.
bit. Let's talk about your plan. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, so I could be, but the first step, if something happens, is they're going to call my cell phone.
That's literally the first step, by the way. It says call Micah Shalansky, and it has Micah's cell phone number. Now, Micah, before you and I were friends, which is a few years now, there was another gentleman whose name was on there. And it was just like, hey, listen, if this happens, call this person's cell phone, explain to them what's happening, and then whatever they say, do that thing exactly until you can get a hold of me, which is kind of how that needs to be, right? And those can be hard relationships to have. And Mike, I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed that I can have it. I'm like, great. I mean, heck, if that's my first step, if I was in the office, I'd be like, you should probably call Micah and figure out what we're going to do here.
Well, Jarvis, that was what I was going to bring up, right? The first step is not when you're gone what happens. What would you do if you were in the office and that happens? Now, the reason I bring that up is not just to say that Jarvis is going to call me for all of his advice and help and success of his practice. That's one part of it.
Oh, for sure.
But it's the aspect of saying, what would I do if I was there? But I want someone else who can look at this, who has experience from a level-headed position. I don't want to get compliance involved yet. I don't want to get attorneys involved yet. I don't want to start ringing all these bells. I need a coaching program, a coaching platform to step up here and be like, hey, think of these things, and someone you can kind of lean on. Then step 2 is probably going to be called a compliance guy, right? But that's really important in any disaster recovery, especially with your team, who's someone else in a similar situation that they can lean on to give you an outside opinion, a little bit dispassionate, that's not feeling the same emotions that you're feeling at that moment.
This, by the way, and Mike, I'm glad you bring this up. This is a critical thing in even a first aid scenario. So if you're in a first aid situation and it's not like seconds count, right? I'll give you a quick example. Several years ago, I was out dirt biking in the woods with my son, falls off the dirt bike, and massively breaks his leg. Turns out to be a spiral fracture, right? And so and
that's while he was at school, if I recall that correctly?
It was technically a school day, and mom was technically out of town. By technically out of town, I mean she was out of town. So I went through my initial first aid ride, stabilizing, had my first aid kit, treating for shock. But then I could just tell, like, wait a second, I'm not thinking super clearly right now. And so I was in cell phone reception. So I called my dad and I'm like, hey, listen, what do you recommend I do here? And so he was able to objectively and not with all those emotions be like, oh, this is the obvious next step. Like, I was debating between 2 steps. He's like, now this is the obvious next step. Do this step. And we went from there. But Micah, your point is valid. Like, if there's a situation, whether that's a first aid situation or your practice, right? The SEC shows up, or your broker dealer sends you a U4, or you're working at Bear Stearns and they shut down one day, or you're working for Arthur Andersen and they shut down one day. Like, there's so Washington Mutual and they shut down one day. There's so many of these examples. You need someone you can reach out to. Now, where to find that person? This is where masterminds come in handy. Micah, that's how you and I established our friendship, was over masterminds.
Yep.
You can be part of a bigger organization, but it needs to be somebody that doesn't have skin in the game. You cannot say, hey, the guy that owns my RA, that's the guy who I'm going to call. Or the guy at the broker dealer that I really like, that's who I'm going to call. That's not the guy. It has to be somebody outside of the situation.
Yeah, one of the few exceptions, somebody without skin in the game, is going to be a good place, a good
Hmm.
place to start. And I'll just get a little bit of my preachiness going
Yeah,
on here,
please.
especially with your kids and whatnot. Make sure they know first aid. Make sure they've done wilderness survival classes. Make sure they've done these things. It's amazing how important these skills are. And maybe Jarvis, just because you and I just do so many adventures and so much backcountry stuff, it's a lot more prevalent. But I'm always shocked whenever I go out and dives with people, when I go on hikes with people. I always talk with them in advance. And I always share some stories. I'm like, what would you do in this situation? And when I'm sharing those stories, I'm really saying, who am I going to partner with? Right? Because I want to know
Yes.
how they're thinking. And it's been several times on dive boats, I've shared some dive stories. I'm like, what would you do in this situation? And they tell me, be like, not partnering with you. And I go to somebody else, right? Because I'm like, clearly you're not thinking the same thing. And if my life is in your hands, I want someone to think about this. Same thing with the business as well. Hey, Jarvis, if you were in a B situation and your top client called in and this was the problem, what would you do in this situation, right? That's how Jarvis and I really kind of came to making sure we're on the same mindset with things. So I can use those same stories, those same questions in masterminds. Let's make sure we're connecting on this. Let's make sure we're on the same page with these things. It's super important.
I love it. Well, Micah, let's jump into a few more real tactical items. Talked about the importance of doing first aid training with your kids, obviously with your spouse. But and we're going to bounce around between the personal side and the practice side. But what are a few more? I know one that comes to mind for me. I'm a big advocate of it. I know you are due to a certain situation, which is making sure that you have smoke detectors and fire extinguishers in your garage, and not the little dinky one that goes underneath your kitchen sink. I'm talking the one that has the hose on it that you can knock somebody out with. I, by the way, have those at every entrance to both of my garages, so that wherever I'm at, and now if you've never had a fire in your garage, and no one on this call has not had a fire on the garage, you know the importance of having a big fire extinguisher.
Yeah, it's not only super important that the family knows where those fire extinguishers are, right?
Yep.
And how to use them. Another thing that we do, Jarvis, and I know you do something similar. Anytime we're going to have a bonfire, we're going to have something else that goes out. We have a traveling fire extinguisher. We have fixed ones that they do not move. Right? Like I will be pissed if I walk in and see this fire extinguisher moved unless there's a fire. Everybody knows where it is. But we also have ones that we move with us if we're going to throw a big bonfire or something else that's available. It's to the exit of the house is where we always put it, or the entrance of the house, right? Somewhere close to that. So somebody sees something is leaving at the house, they always know where it is. So that's definitely going to be one. That we always have. Now, we live in Alaska in the wintertime, so we always have winter kits in our truck, in our vehicles, right? If you break down, there's one road in Alaska, it goes north and it goes south, right? We have a couple lanes, but it's one. And so it's really important. If the bridge is out, if there's an accident or something like this, and you get stuck in your car because there's a blizzard or snowstorm, which is what we call a Tuesday in Alaska,
Yeah.
right? What are you going to do? So those are just really important things that we have just in place all the time.
This one sounds a little odd, Micah, but so my middle daughter, Ella, is now turning 16, so she's got her driver's permit. One of the things that I did with her and my older daughter, Alice, who's now 18, is we actually watched fail videos. Now, not the fail videos where the guy falls off his skateboard and hits himself between the legs, but the fail boards for
Again and again.
yeah, again and again. The fail videos for car accidents. And so we would watch these fail videos for a car accident, and then we would pause and we'd say, all right, what caused this accident to happen, right? What did the driver do wrong? Now, sometimes that's pretty egregious. Like they blew through a red light at 150 miles an hour, or they took an unprotected left. But then we would say, all right, the other people that were in that accident who were not at fault, but their car was still totaled, they may still be dead. What could they have potentially done to prevent that accident, right? So that's on a driving side. It's been very educational, but then also on the practice side, right? Like I enjoy, maybe it's a sick pleasure, reading what's essentially the crime blotter for our industry. When people get sanctioned by the SEC or by FINRA, when broker dealers get in trouble, when things blow up, what happened? What were the warning signs that everyone ignored that I need to watch for? And there's always innocent bystanders, but how could I have potentially been aware of that before it happened?
Yeah. And with that, how are you bringing somebody else in to look for those blind spots? Because they're your blind spots. You looking for them doesn't really help, right? It's somebody else looking for those blind spots on an everyday activity that you're doing that could be problematic, right? It's not, I don't want to say criminal, you're not doing anything bad or illegal, right? I mean, coming on, this is all table stakes, right? But it's something that you're just not paying attention to. And it could be somebody going off of guardrails or going off of buckets, taking excess distributions, and there's no documentation on it, right? This could be a blind spot for you, little things like that. Jarvis, another thing on the personal side, I always have my kids take first aid class, wilderness survival classes, right? And then we always travel with a medical kit. Almost always, I'm going to have some base trauma kit with me. And with it, I've responded to several emergencies.
Including
And one
your
of the
own.
things is, it's several, including my own, right? And having to be my own, doctor or EMS, fixing stuff up with traumatic head wounds. But it's one of those things that having the right equipment can help save lives. And not having that equipment, you're going to watch somebody die. And that's not being dramatic about it. That's being really serious. So not only having the equipment, but knowing how to use the equipment and going through that training, boy, especially with kids, I think is really, really important to make sure that's there. And I'm selfish. I have my kids do it. So if something happens to me, they can save my life.
Yeah, and these things don't have to be super elaborate, right? This doesn't mean you need to do like a 1 week wilderness survival retreat, though that would be fun. And those are actually a lot of fun.
A blast.
This can be a 1 day. This could even be the Red Cross 1 day CPR, super basic first aid, right? These things make a big difference. Micah, you mentioned about fire extinguishers. We have a dummy fire extinguisher that we charge up with water so the kids can practice actually, like, because if you've never used a fire extinguisher on a fire, it's not like you imagine it. There's about like one poof of extinguisher in there, one poof, not like 5 minutes of spray. There's like you pull the trigger once and the thing is done and you probably missed the fire, right? This comes up a lot of times. Micah, practice specific as well. What if your laptop dies? What if your internet gets cut out to your office? What if the power goes out? What if your building burns down? Like these are all things I literally have seen advisors do. And if you haven't thought of a plan B for this, you've got to, right? Like, hey, if the laptop I take on vacation with me dies, what am I going to do? Great news. I have a second laptop. Actually, when we were on our boat trip, I had a laptop get immersed in salt water from inside the boat.
Wonder how that happened.
Yeah, it's kind of its own story. If I had not had a backup laptop, I'd have a big problem, right? So I owe you the same thing. Like I always travel with my laptop and my iPad as a backup, just because, and my credit card that has a very high limit, so I could go down to the Apple store and pick up another device in a heartbeat.
So it was funny years and years ago. I mean, we were online before it was cool. Right now, everybody's online.
Sure.
But when it was kind of first coming out, and Dad lost his computer, no, didn't lose his computer. His computer turned into a brick for some reason on the airplane. Just was dead and would not work whatsoever. And so he calls, and I think he was through Seattle. So Anchorage to Seattle is when he lost his computer. And I was already down in Florida, and he was coming down to meet us. I said, no problem. We'll just pick up a laptop, and you'll be up and running by the end of the day. He's like, no, Mike, you don't understand. It's dead. It's gone. I don't have a backup. I said, actually, Dad, you do have a backup because we're cloud-based and everything's there. Sure enough, but it's just, we call the Apple store and we have a business account. They give us a laptop the same day. It's part of our agreement. They give it to us. We just restore everything and he's fully up and running and there's no downtime, right? And we take that almost for granted in how we're set up. But, when I go to Europe for 2 months or for a month, don't tell my wife it's 2 months, just 1 month, all right? But when we go just for a month, it's, I'm going to bring 2 devices, that same thing. Is how do you make sure that you're staying connected?
Yeah. Or like who has all the master passwords, right? It's like, oh, I have all the passwords. Cool. What if you can't remember the password for some reason? What if you get knocked in the head or you were gone or passed away, right? There's a lot of those.
Oh, Jarvis, I got to add to that. Got to add to that one. We just working with one company and they terminated an employee. And when they terminated an employee for cause, is all of a sudden they lost password access. And I'm like, so you didn't have a log of what systems that employee had access to and how to get into them. And there was this pause. I said, well, great news. I think you're going to add that to the list of things you need to do. And here's how we're going to recover from that and go through it. But they've never been through that in the termination of an employee. Right now, we've done it multiple times. And so now we have several things in place of how are we going to be there when we lose an employee? Not if, but when we lose a key employee, how are you going to recover?
Yeah, I love that. Well, Michael, let's take those. Let's transition to a couple really specific action items because this podcast is, of course, all about taking action. It is only the things that you do that count. Like we said in your emergency example, right? The people who stood on the shore and watched the boat sink, even if they knew everything about it, it did not do any good, right? It's the people that do. So action item number 1, and again, we've done podcasts on this. Everyone has all the time in the world, so please do not tell yourself you don't have time for these things. Action number 1, do these emergency drills. Pick 2 or 3 to do with your family. Pick 2 or 3 to do yourself. Pick 2 or 3 to do with your practice, right? This can be simple ones like the kitchen catches on fire. This could be someone breaks a leg. This could be a car accident or broken down on the side of the road. For your practice, again, ones to do, we lose access to our custodian or broker dealer. A key employee quits or is fired. These are a couple of drills that you need to have documented.
So, Jarvis, one of the things, and Jimmy's going to do a pod on disaster recovery, which will be great to listen to. But one of the things that we did in our office is we kind of taped it. We got some butcher paper and we drew like fire on there one morning and went to the office early and we put like fire on the door, right? And we said, there's a fire, activate the, and by the way, we're not available either. So activate the disaster recovery plan. We wanted to just test it. One of our key employees just opened the door and I'm sitting in there anyways, just to make sure nobody comes in. I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I have work to do. I said, did you see the fire on the door? She's like, it's just paper, Micah. I have actual work to do. I'm like, damn it, this is a drill. But then it was a good test. And one of the team members didn't have cell phone numbers of the other team members. So, because we had shut off certain access just to see what they would do. So these are good drills to see happen. You're supposed to do them anyways in your disaster recovery plan to test these to see how it works.
Yeah, for sure. Action number 2, this is required for RIA firms, but it's a best practice in all firms. You have to have contingency plans in place. These are written plans that if you, as the advisor, get struck by a bus, or you capsize your boat, or get stuck overseas, what is going to happen to your practice? And again, this is where you can fall trap of, oh, my team will figure it out, my spouse will figure it out, my broker dealer will figure it out, No. You are required by law to have a contingency plan in place. It says if something happens to you, what happens to clients so that they're protected, right? So you've got to have that in place.
Action item number 3 is know the what ifs, right? Don't dwell in them and get stuck by them. These are empowering things to think about. Hey, we read the blotters. What can happen? Okay, great. What would I do in this case? Well, let's make sure your team knows about it. Let's make sure your clients know about it. We share a disaster recovery plan with our clients. Just like, hey, great news. We have a plan for this. If there's an earthquake in Alaska and it shuts our office down, great news. Your money is still safe. Here's the plan and what we're going to do, right? These are really important things that we want them to know about as well.
Yeah, in another episode, we'll have to share our disaster recovery plan if the dollar is replaced, which is actually a discussion we have with clients in very certain situations. So that's a fun one to share. Last action item, as always, a quick thank you to our sponsors, but most specifically, you, our listener. It is your sharing the podcast. It's your giving it 5 stars again and again and a nice review that really helps grow and helps us transform the industry. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you for our sponsors. And hey, Micah, thank you as well. This is a lot of fun, my friend.
Jarvis, it's a blast to our listeners. You guys are awesome. Remember, vote early, vote often. 5 stars is what we want to see, especially in an election year. So thank you guys very much. Jarvis, until next time, happy planting.
Happy planting.
Hey, before you leave, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody, I want you to take a quick look around your office, and on your desk, there should be the Retirement Tax Services Desktop Tax Guide. And if it's not there, or if it's not current, meaning you didn't download it in the last month, go to retirementtaxservices.com and download the Desktop Tax Guide. This is a must-have resource for every financial advisor committed to tax planning.
Hold on before we go. Something that you need to know. This isn't tax, legal, or investment advice. That isn't our intent. Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice. Be a better husband, father, mother, and wife.